Welcome to the creepy story for sleep. Get ready to dive into the most terrifying stories you've ever heard. But before we begin, tell me, from which city are you watching this video? Leave it in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to face the terror that's coming, show your support with a Justin and I had been together for 10 years, married for 6. I'd been with him for my whole adult life. We'd been dating since I was 17 and he was 18. I always thought he was my soulmate, the man I wanted to grow old with. Turns out I was wrong. I was devastated when I found out, yes, Justin had been staying out later than usual, and his explanations were usually flimsy at best. I'm not stupid. I had my suspicions, but I think I just really didn't want to come to terms with the fact that my husband was seeing another woman. Honestly, I might have gone years without discovering the truth, but Justin got sloppy. Welcome home, honey. Fun night out with the guys after work again? Justin grumbled, brushing past me. I made dinner if you're hungry. Beef tips and rice. I know it's one of your favorites. Ate at the bar. I'm going to bed, he muttered, steadying himself against the wall before woozily clomping up the stairs. My heart sank. Nights like those were becoming more and more frequent. I loved my husband. All I wanted was to spend a little quality time with him after a long day at work, but he couldn't even spare me a few minutes. I glanced up at him as he lumbered up the steps, a tear trickling down my cheek. In an instant, any sadness that I felt was replaced with burning rage, because when Justin passed underneath the overhead light, I saw what appeared to be a hickey on the side of his neck. A cocktail of emotions swirled within me. Despair, resentment, betrayal, they all hit me like a ton of bricks. I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. Who would? The man I had been head over heels for all that time had stabbed me in the back. I was in disbelief. I stumbled to the kitchen, pulling out a chair before I could collapse. I stared into space, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I sat there for a long time, deep in thought. After a while, I felt numb, like my entire personality had been flushed down the drain, leaving nothing but an empty husk. Then a thought flashed across my mind. I'd been mistaken. That had to be it, just a mere trick of the light. It was a pretty dimly lit hallway, after all. Whatever the case, I had to know. I tiptoed upstairs, abandoning my dinner. I crept up to our room as quiet as a church mouse, before lightly pushing open the bedroom door. Justin was fast asleep. I didn't waste any time. I rushed across the room, careful to avoid any squeaky floorboards, and I inspected Justin's neck. His snores grew louder as I approached. He always was a heavy sleeper, I cursed when I got a closer look. Justin was sleeping on his side, and I was not going to try to roll him over. I glanced around, searching for anything that might provide concrete evidence. My eyes fell to the bedside table. Bingo! I snatched Justin's phone from his charger. I held my breath as I pressed his meaty thumb onto the screen to unlock it. I grinned, feeling a rush of exhilaration as I achieved my goal. What? I froze. Justin gradually opened his eyes a sliver as my hand hovered over him. My blood turned to ice, and I prayed with all my might that my husband would just go back to sleep. To my immense shock, my prayers were answered. Justin mumbled incoherently under his breath before grabbing a fistful of covers and nodding off. I'd escaped by the skin of my teeth. I had to be more careful. The first thing I did was check Justin's texts. I immediately saw a woman's name I didn't recognize. My heart shattered when I read the messages. Hey, baby. Last night was incredible. See you again after work today. You're damn right. I wish you never had to leave. What about that wife of yours, though? Won't she get suspicious, her? Not a chance. Even if she does find out, she won't leave. I could murder a baby in front of her, and she'd still think I was a saint. A deep-seated rage bubble within me. Did Justin really think that little of me? He clearly saw me as nothing more than a spineless, codependent pushover. Well, I'd show him I screenshotted the evidence, scrolling through dozens of nude photos that I hadn't taken, and set everything to my number. I deleted any proof of my snooping, then replaced Justin's phone on the charger. I stormed out of the room, grabbing my keys as I went. I made it halfway across the living room when the realization hit me I had nowhere to go. All my family lived 7 hours away. It was too late to book a decent hotel, and I really didn't want to drag any of my friends into my drama. Not yet, at least. That left me with one option. I had to sleep on the couch. I plopped down onto the sofa and sighed. I didn't want to have to confront it, but I knew what I had to do. In the morning, I was going to find a lawyer and start the divorce process. The thought alone was enough to break me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I cried like a baby, silently sobbing into a scratchy pillow for what must have been hours. My eyes were puffy by the time I was done. I couldn't fathom falling asleep in a state like that, but I must have at some point, because the next thing I remembered, sunlight was flooding through the blinds. Morning, babe. How'd you the rest of the sentence got in my throat? That was right, Justin and I were about to be over. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, tears stinging at the corners of my vision. I opened up the texts I'd sent myself as proof that the past 12 hours hadn't been some twisted nightmare, but the messages were gone. My eyes grew wide as I stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. They'd been there, clear as day the night before. Something wasn't adding up. I suddenly paused, bolting upright. Was that breakfast? The tantalizing aroma of eggs and bacon wafted around the corner from the kitchen. My brows furrowed. Justin never cooked. My breathing was shallow as I tentatively shuffled toward the kitchen. Curiosity gnawed at me like a piranha. I apprehensively peeked around the corner, unsure of what I would find. To my shock, there was my husband, humming a little tune of flipping pancakes. I rubbed my eyes. Was I seeing things? Surely I was delusional from lack of sleep. That had to have been it. Then Justin turned, his icy blue eyes locking on to mine. Morning, princess. I hope you're hungry. I saw you sleeping on the couch, and I thought you might not be feeling well. So I decided to make you a hot meal to help you get better. My heart skipped a beat. Was this really my husband? It looked like him, sounded like him too. Still, I was weary. Yeah. Just feeling a little under the weather is all. Are you feeling okay? You're acting different. Never been better. Honestly, I think I've really turned a new leaf, he said, placing a steaming plate before me. The old Justin escape it. From now on, I swear, I'm going to be the best husband I can be. Our gazes connected, and I searched his expression for answers. He seemed genuine. If this was an act, it was a damn good one. Thanks, babe. That really makes me happy to hear. Justin beamed at me, the warmth of his smile seeping into my heart. It had been years since he looked at me like that. Well, get used to it, because I'm keeping my word. I love you, Lydia. I wanted to be suspicious. I wanted to remain silent. I wanted to keep my guard up, but how could I? All I needed was love and attention, and I was finally getting it. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my husband actually cared. I love you too, Justin, I muttered before digging into my meal. A big part of me was still leery of my husband. His timing was pretty convenient, after all. But even with all my doubts, Justin was seemingly sticking to his promise. He took me out on dates, paid to get my nails done, bought me flowers. He even started shouldering most of the housework. Needless to say, I was impressed. If he would have kept that up, I might have never suspected a thing, but one night he slipped up. We were cuddled up on the couch, watching the Truman Show, when I asked, "Now, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. Hey, babe." "Yes, my love." Justin asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. If someone close to you was an imposter, like a perfect replica except for a few tiny changes, do you think you'd notice? Justin tensed up, his eyes wide as he slowly turned to face me. A blank stare had overtaken his expression. A chill rippled through my body when he looked at me like that. He was beginning to frighten me, I suppose. "So, why do you ask?" His voice was monotone, dripping with a tinge of urgency. I didn't know how to process his sudden shift in personality. "It's the premise of the movie we're watching." I watched as the color seeped back into his face, and he loosened up, breathing a sigh of relief. I cocked a curious brow. Why was he acting so strange? "That makes sense." We sat there in uncomfortable silence, shifting our attention back to the TV screen. After a few more tense moments, I couldn't take it anymore. "I've got to use the restroom and charge my phone. I'll be right back." "No need to pause the movie for me." Justin nodded before grinning up at me. His smile. Had his teeth always been that straight? "Okay, baby girl, hurry back. Wouldn't want your spot to get cold." "Yeah, sure thing." I practically bolted up the stairs, locking myself in our room. I slumped against the door, trying to steady my palpitating heart. What was going on? Was it just me, or was that some seriously freaky behavior? Either way, I needed a second to calm down. I had my eyes shut, focusing on my breathing, when I heard it. My phone was buzzing from inside my pocket. I hurriedly retrieved it, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. I normally don't answer calls from strangers, but something compelled me. Maybe it was intuition, or perhaps I just wanted someone to talk to other than my husband. In the end, I accepted the call. Hello, Lydia. Lydia Atkins. Speaking. "Look, this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to hear what I have to say." "Okay." I suddenly jolted up from my spot on the floor and stared at the locked door separating me from the hallway. Loud knocks rattled it in its frame. "Lydia." "Lydia? Who are you speaking to?" Panic surged through me as I scrambled for an answer. It's my mom. Go back downstairs. I'll be there in a minute." That was him, wasn't it? The caller said that was my husband. "Yes." "Why do you ask?" I whispered, putting as much distance between myself and the door as possible. "Lydia, I need you to hear me out. Can you promise me that you will?" The pounding on the opposite side of the room grew even louder. "Lydia, don't listen to her. She's a fucking liar." My stomach began to twist itself into knots. How did he know I'm listening? "I'll hear what you have to say." The woman on the other end of the line breathed an audible sigh of relief. "Okay, my name is Adeline, and Justin and I have been seeing each other for about 9 months. That man in your house is not your husband." My blood turned to ice, and I began to tremble. "No, that couldn't be true." In a shaky voice, I asked the question that will haunt me until I die. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" There was a long pause, the bangs outside my door reaching a nauseating crescendo. When Adeline answered, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was in serious danger. "Lydia, for the past week, Justin has been living with me." I was a student back then in 2014. My elder sister was just got married in June, and it was September 2014 when I lost my uncle, who was very, very dear to me, and he was a teacher by profession and used to teach me and my siblings. We are 3 siblings, and I am the youngest, so my uncle just used to love me a lot. He had my name sticked in his every bike he bought. He loved my elder brother and sister too, but I was his favorite. My uncle had a failed marriage and was a drinker, but he never misbehaved with any one of us in the family, always carrying and bringing chocolates for us. We were a joint family, but my uncle left the house long ago when his wife left him because of his drinking issues, and my father also did not want us children to grow where my uncle is drinking endlessly and creating fuss. Even when he was apart, he helped me with studies. He used to come home and teach me. One thing he never forgot to bring was my favorite Indian sweet, rasmalai. I loved it. Anyways, cut to his death. His death was very sudden. My father got a call from his colleague randomly on the evening of the 15th of September 2014, when we were informed that his health is very bad. He was drinking a lot, and he had diabetes, which he was not managing, and drinking more. And after 1 hour we got another call when we were informed that he is no more. We were saddened. We loved him, but could not save him. I always felt his presence, love, and care even when he was gone. It was all happy memories I had with him. I usually used to dream about him coming home over weekend with my favorite sweets, teaching me, and every memory was sometimes flashing through. It was 2016 when I was in my 12th standard and I was preparing hard for my boards. I used to study late in the night to prepare, and in the morning I used to have my exams. I chose to study alone in separate room, and everyone was sleeping. I remember it was my maths exam, and I was preparing and thinking of my uncle. If he would have been alive, I would not be struggling in this. And after some time, I just slept there on the table, keeping my head down. It was 3 to 4 a.m. in the night. I was sitting alone on the chair, sleeping, keeping my head down on table, and suddenly a whisper run through my ear, "Get up, you are not prepared." I ignored it. After 2 minutes, same words, but it's a voice now which I can recognize. It was my uncle. I had goosebumps on my entire arm. I looked up and ignored it to sleep once again. After 20 minutes, a tap on my head comes with voice, "This is how you will pass your exam. Get up," and a box of pen fell on the floor there. I had enough. I ran to my parents' room. They were sleeping peacefully, and I just adjusted myself between them and slept. The next morning, while I was getting ready for my exam, I could not stop thinking about what happened in the night. I was lost on thoughts. I was thinking maybe I was sleepy and imagining things. Maybe it's all in my head. My mom noticed the uneasiness in me and asked what I was worrying about. I told her what happened at night. My mom just laughed and said, "Uncle loved you so much and wants you to do good. That is why he was just trying to help you. Don't you worry, you are good." That gave me a sense of relief, and I gave my exams peacefully. Cut to 2022. After my 12th, I moved to another state for my graduation. I completed my graduation and started working. Now I used to visit home 2 to 3 times in a year for short time due to harsh work deadlines. It was 2020 till when I was diagnosed with disc bulge, and I was advised to take complete bed rest for 1 month. I came home to take care of my health. During that, my father was planning to renovate the house. It was good 10 days I spent at home, but I used to feel something odd in the house. The room where me and my mother used to sleep was unbearably cold. I had a dog. He always used to be with me since my mom snores, and I used to be uncomfortable. I decided to sleep in another room which was attached to the kitchen. I decided to sleep there alone BCZ. I had reading habit, and since my mom sleeps early, I was not able to read with lights on. One fine night, it may be around 9 to 9:30 p.m., I was going to sleep with my book in hand. I lay down and my dog comes along sitting on my bed, sleeping, and I was reading my book. The book got interesting and was zoned out. Since kitchen was attached, I could hear things from the window opens to the yard. Our house was destructed because of renovation work. My mom was in her room talking on the phone. Dad was in washroom. I am reading, and suddenly I hear somebody calling out my mom's sister-in-law. It was a loud voice, and I thought Mom will hear and answer. I heard that again, a little more louder through the window, sister-in-law. I called out my mom. Mom, somebody is calling you. Please check the door. And I heard it again more loud and clear, with a loud knock on the window. Sister-in-law followed my loud knock on window. I was irritated. BCZ Mom was not going and checking, and my dog got up and ran towards the yard and started barking from where the voice was coming. I went to my mom's room, and in an irritating voice I said, "What are you doing? Somebody is calling you from I don't know how long. Can't you hear?" My mom looked at my face strangely and said I couldn't hear anyone. "Who's calling?" I said, "I don't know, maybe somebody from neighbor calling you sister-in-law, sister-in-law." Her expressions changed a bit. We both went out where my dog was standing and barking. We found no one, literally no one. I realized the voice was just like my uncle. When my father came out from the washroom, I told him. He just told me that I am thinking a lot. I read random books that is affecting my brain. My mom, though, did not say much and asked me to come to her room and sleep with her. I never slept alone again after that at home. My dog always with me. The next morning, my mom started to ask me weird questions on how am I doing in another city. Do I sleep well? Do I hear these strange voices where I stay? Did I see Uncle in dreams, etc.? I asked my mom what is wrong, and she told me your uncle never left us. He was always here. Your dad and I had many encounters. First we thought he is not harmful, but now, when we are renovating the house from scratch, he is not happy about it. Your uncle does not want us to renovate this house. We went to a priest to seek help, and he helped us to keep your uncle out of the house, and this is why he is not able to enter. This is the reason we hear such voices, but nothing much can be done. He cannot harm us. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. But with prayers the house is safe, and I avoid sleeping alone whenever I go home. I never thought I'd be the kind of person posting on Now Sleep, but here I am. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone out there has dealt with something similar. God, I hope not, but I'm desperate for answers. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Jake, a 19-year-old college student living with my parents in a small town just outside of Portland, Oregon. We've got a cozy 2-story house on a quiet street, surrounded by towering pine trees. It's usually peaceful here, but for the past week, our nights have been anything but. My mom, Sarah, is a high school English teacher. She's always been the rational one in the family with a no-nonsense attitude that usually keeps us grounded. Dad, on the other hand, is Mike, a former Marine turned construction foreman. He's got that tough guy exterior, but I've always known he's a softy at heart, especially when it comes to me and Mom. It all started last Tuesday. I was up late studying for a biology exam, my eyes burning from staring at my textbook for hours. I glanced at my phone. 4:30 a.m. Shit, I muttered, realizing I'd have to be up for class in just a few hours. That's when I heard it, the distinct sound of our doorbell. Who the hell would be ringing our doorbell at this hour. I crept downstairs, my heart pounding. Our Chihuahua, Scooby, was already at the door, growling softly. I peeked through the peephole and felt my blood run cold. There, illuminated by our porch light, stood an old woman. She was thin, almost skeletal, with wispy white hair that seemed to float around her head like a halo. Her skin was pale and wrinkled, hanging loosely on her face, but it was her eyes that really freaked me out. They were completely black, like the empty void staring straight at me. Jake, what's going on? Mom's voice made me jump. She'd come downstairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes. There's an old woman outside. I asked T-A-M-M-E-R-E-D. Mom frowned and gently nudged me aside to look for herself. Her sharp intake of breath told me she saw her too. Dad appeared moments later, his Marine training evident in his alert stance despite being woken up. Should we should we open the door? I asked hesitantly. Mom shook her head. No, absolutely not. We don't know who she is or what she wants at this hour. Her teacher instincts kicked in immediately. We need to document this, she said, grabbing a notebook to jot down every detail. Dad, meanwhile, went into full protection mode, checking every window and door locked twice. I'm calling the police, he said, his voice gruff with concern. While Mom dialed, I kept watch through the peephole. The old woman remained motionless, her arms hanging limply at her sides. It was like she was a statue, except for those eyes. They seemed to follow my every movement. Even though I knew she couldn't see me, the police arrived about 15 minutes later. As soon as their car pulled up, the old woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of our street. The officers took our statement, but there wasn't much they could do. No laws had been broken, and the woman was gone. They promised to keep an eye out during their patrols and left. We all went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that old woman's face, those black, empty eyes. The next night, I made sure to be in bed early, but at exactly 4:31 a.m., I woke up to Scooby's frantic barking. My stomach dropped as I realized what it must mean. Sure enough, there she was again. This time, she was a few steps closer to our front door. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. This pattern repeated for the next 5 nights. Each time, the old woman appeared at exactly 4:31 a.m., and each time, she was a little bit closer to our house. As the nightly visits continued, I watched my parents struggling to cope. Mom threw herself into research, spending hours online looking for similar cases or local legends. There has to be a logical explanation, she'd mutter, surrounded by stacks of printouts. Dad, true to form, focused on fortifying the house. He installed new locks, motion sensor lights, and even talked about getting a security system. I could hear them arguing in hushed tones late at night. Mom wanted to go to the media, thinking publicity might help. Someone out there must know something, she insisted, but Dad was dead set against it. You want us to be the crazy family on the evening news, he'd retort. The tension between them was palpable, and it scared me almost as much as the old woman. Last night was the worst so far. She was right at the bottom of our porch steps, her face turned up towards my bedroom window. I swear, even though it was dark and she was far away, I could see a faint smile on her lips. I don't know what to do. The police have stopped responding to our calls. They think we're pulling some kind of prank. My parents are at their wits' end, torn between their fear and their need to protect me. Part of me hopes this is all just some weird, prolonged dream, that I'll wake up and everything will be normal again. But deep down, I know that's not the case. If anyone has experienced anything like this, please let me know. I don't know how much longer he can take this nightly visitor. I'll update if anything changes. For now, I'm just praying she doesn't get any closer tonight. Thanks for all the responses to my last post. I wish I had better news, but things have only gotten worse. Much worse. It's been 3 more nights since I last updated, and each one has been more terrifying than the last. The old woman is getting closer, and I'm starting to lose my mind. My parents aren't faring much better. On the 8th night, she was halfway up our porch steps. I remember pressing my face against the cool glass of my bedroom window, my breath fogging up the pane as I stared down at her. She stood there, motionless, those black eyes fixed on our front door. Dad, thinking he could scare her off, flicked on the porch light and yelled through the door, "We see you. Get off our property or we're calling the cops." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear behind his tough facade. The moment the words left his mouth, the old woman's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto my window. A chill ran down my spine as a grin spread across her face, revealing rows of yellowed, pointed teeth. "Oh God," I whispered, stumbling back from the window. When I worked up the courage to look again, she was gone, but the porch light was off, even though Dad swore he never touched the switch. The next night, she made it to the top of the porch. This time, Mom lost it. "That's it," she screamed, stomping down the stairs. "I'm going out there and giving this old bat a piece of my mind." Her usually calm demeanor had cracked, replaced by a frantic desperation. "Sarah, no," Dad yelled, but she was already yanking the door open. The old woman stood there, her face inches from my mom's. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then my mom let out a blood-curdling scream and slammed the door shut. She collapsed against it, sobbing. Her eyes, she kept saying, "Oh God," her eyes. Dad wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes wide with shock. I'd never seen my mother so shaken, and it terrified me more than anything else had so far. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, jumping at every creak and groan of our old house. When morning came, we found deep scratch marks on the outside of our front door. Last night was the worst yet. At 4:31 a.m., like clockwork, Scooby started barking. But this time, it wasn't his usual aggressive bark. It was high-pitched. Terrified, I ran downstairs to find him cowering in the corner of the living room, whimpering. And there, pressed against our front window, was the old woman's face. Her skin looked even more deteriorated up close, hanging off her cheekbones in gray, rotting strips. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, revealing a black void where her tongue should have been. But her eyes, God, her eyes. They were like bottomless pits, and as I stared into them, I felt like I was falling. I don't know how long I stood there, transfixed. It could have been seconds or hours. I was only snapped out of it when I heard my dad's voice. Jake, snap out of it. Son, he shook me roughly, his face pale with worrying. I blinked, coming back to reality. The old woman was gone, but a foul, rotting smell lingered in the air. We're at our wits' end. My parents are barely holding it together. Mom's stopped trying to find logical explanations and has started leaving salt lines at all the doors and windows. Dad's talking about calling in favors from his old Marine buddies, convinced that we're under some kind of attack. I've been researching nonstop, trying to find any similar cases or local legends that might explain what's happening. So far, I've come up empty. The only lead I have is an old newspaper article I found from the 1950s. It mentioned a widow carver who lived in a cabin in the woods near our neighborhood. Apparently, She was accused of witchcraft and driven out of town. The article said she vowed revenge on the townspeople and their descendants before disappearing into the forest. Thought it's probably nothing, just my desperate mind grasping at straws. But at this point I'll take any explanation, no matter how far-fetched. I don't know what tonight will bring, but I'm dreading for 31 a.m. The old woman has made it to our window. The next step is inside our house. I'll update again tomorrow, if I can. If you don't hear from me, Well, I don't want to think about that. Wish us luck. Nah, sleep. I have a feeling we're going to need it. I'm writing this with shaking hands, trying to make sense of what happened last night. I don't know if I'm going crazy or if something truly evil has invaded our lives. Either way, I'm terrified. Yesterday evening, my parents and I tried to prepare for the old woman's nightly visit. We double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains, and even pushed furniture against the doors. Dad got his old baseball bat from the garage, and Mom clutched a can of pepper spray. We were determined to confront whatever came at 4:31 a.m. as our approach. We huddled together in the living room. Scooby was unnaturally quiet, curled up in a tight ball under the coffee table. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. 4:30 a.m., 1 minute to go. Maybe she won't come, Mom whispered, her knuckles white around the pepper spray. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by raw fear. 4:31 a.m., for a moment, nothing happened. We held our breath, ears straining for any sound. Then we heard it, a soft scraping nose coming from the front door. Dad gripped his bat tighter. I'm going to check, he said, moving towards the door. His Marine training was kicking in, but I could see the tremor in his hands. No. Mom and I hissed in unison, but he was already at the peephole. He looked through and stumbled back, his face pale. She's gone, he stammered. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived, because at that moment we heard Scooby let out a pitiful whine. We turned to see him staring, trembling, at something behind us. Slowly, dreading what I'd see, I turned around. There she was, inside our house. The old woman stood in the doorway to the kitchen, her emaciated frame silhouetted against the darkness. Her black eyes seemed to suck in all the light in the room. Mom screamed. Dad swung his bat, but it passed right through her as if she was made of smoke. I saw a side of my parents I'd never seen before. Mom, usually so composed, was shaking like a leaf, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was steady as she recited what sounded like a protection prayer. Dad, who I'd always seen as unshakable, looked utterly lost. But when the old woman took a step forward, he positioned himself in front of us without hesitation, his body a shield. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Those eyes held me paralyzed. She took another step forward, her mouth open, wider than any human mouth should, revealing that terrible black void. Just as she reached out a skeletal hand toward me, Scooby burst from under the table. He launched himself at the old woman, barking furiously. The moment he touched her, there was a blinding flash of light and a sound like a thunderclap. When my vision cleared, both Scooby and the old woman were gone. We spent the rest of the night searching the house, calling for Scooby, but found nothing. No sign of the old woman. No sign of our dog. It was as if they'd never existed. When dawn finally broke, we were exhausted and confused. Had it all been some sort of shared hallucination? But the scratch marks on the door were still there, and Scooby was still missing. Mom's rational facade finally cracked. She spent hours calling animal shelters and tacking up missing dog posters, her voice breaking every time she had to describe Scooby. Dad, who had always rolled his eyes at Scooby's yapping, now wandered the house at night, whistling for him and leaving his favorite treats in every room. I tried to sleep, but when I did, the nightmares came. In my dreams, I was in a dark, misty forest. I could hear Scooby barking in the distance, but every time I moved towards the sound, it got further away, and always, just at the edge of my vision, I could see the old woman, watching, waiting. I woke up, gasping for air, my face wet with terrors. That's when I noticed it. A faint whispering in the room, words in a language I didn't understand, barely audible, but definitely there. And something else, ... A light touch on my face, like fingers gently caressing my cheek. I scrambled out of bed and ran downstairs. The living room looked like a scene from a horror movie. Every single flower in the vases, the ones Mom had put out to brighten the mood, was rotting. Not just wilted, but actually decomposing, giving off a sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen, both looking as shell-shocked as I felt. "Did you hear?" I began, but they just nodded silently. The tension that had been building between them seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a shared sense of dread. We're at a loss. The old woman didn't appear at 4:31 a.m. like she had been, but somehow this feels worse. It's like she's everywhere now, invisible, but present, waiting. Scooby is still missing. The police have been no help. They think he just ran away in the night. They don't believe our story about the old woman. To be honest, I'm starting to doubt it myself. But then I look at the rotting flowers, I remember the whispering, the phantom touch on my face, and I know it was real. I found something else, too, something that chills me to the bone. Remember that old newspaper article I mentioned about Widow Carver? I dug deeper and found her full name, Eliza Carver. I also found her death certificate. She died on May 17th, 1954. At 4:31 a.m. Today is May 17th. I showed the death certificate to my parents. Mom's face went ashen, while Dad's jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "This can't be a coincidence," Mom whispered, her voice trembling. She'd abandoned all pretense of rational explanations now. What if ... what if she's come back for revenge? Dad shook his head, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "That's impossible," he muttered. But there was no conviction in his voice. As night fell, the atmosphere in the house became suffocating. We tried to go about our normal routines, but every creak, every shadow, sent us into a panic. Mom kept checking and rechecking the salt lines she'd laid down, muttering protection prayers under her breath. Dad paced restlessly, his old service pistol now holstered at his hip. I don't know what's going to happen tonight. Part of me wants to run, to get as far away from this house as possible. But another part of me knows it won't make a difference. Whatever this is, wherever it came from, it's attached to us now. As I write this, it's 11:45 p.m., less than 5 hours until 4:31 a.m. Mom and Dad are in the living room, holding hands and talking in low voices. I can see the love between them, strengthened by this shared ordeal. Whatever happens tonight, they'll face it as a family. If you're reading this, please be careful of who or what you let into your life. Some doors, once open, can never be closed again. I'll update if I can, but if you don't hear from me again, well, at least you'll know why. Update. 3:17 a.m. Something's wrong. Very wrong. The house has gone completely silent. Not just quiet. Silent. I can't hear the hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of the clock in the hallway. It's like all sound has been sucked out of the world. I tried to go downstairs to check on my parents, but my bedroom door won't open. It's not locked. The handle turns, but it's like there's a solid wall on the other side. The air feels thick, almost syrupy. It's hard to breathe, and it's cold, so cold I can hear whispers now. They're coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I can't make out the words, but they sound ... angry. There's something moving in the shadows of my room. I can't quite see it, but I know it's there, watching, waiting. I have always had sleep issues. Since I was a child, I've experienced sleep paralysis at least a handful of times each year. And outside of sleep paralysis, I often have issues with exploding head syndrome (EHS). At least once a month I experience something in that regard, but things changed on a low part of my life. I have suffered significantly from mental health, which increased the frequency of my sleepy paralysis and EHS. It got to the point of happening at least once a week, sometimes more. I took medication to try and alleviate the issue, but nothing changed. I'd say things got even worse, but that was barely just the start. I had always had an interest in the paranormal. I've been fascinated by the thought of the existence of things beyond our normal comprehension. Death in particular has never bothered me, at least before what happened. It was always nothing to worry about, but because of my issues and the lack of solutions, I decided to attempt contact with the spiritual world. My intention was to ask for a guardian angel, or since I believed my issues were caused by paranormal entities, for the monsters to stop their actions. So, one day, a long time ago, I gathered up my resources and conducted a ritual that went nowhere. I attempted to contact anything that could possibly communicate with me, but I never got anywhere. Nothing ever contacted me, or at least it's what I think, because one very critical rule I never followed is that I never had anything to protect me from breaches in the ritual. I didn't really think it was something to worry about, be it salt circles or pendants. I always assumed that nothing would ever come out of skimming over these rules. But after a week of stopping my ritual attempts, as I did several, my sleep improved significantly. I managed to get full hours of sleep with no issues. This lasted for about 6 weeks. Before, as soon as the 6th week ended, I suddenly came under a significant attack. I still remember the dream. Inside of it, I was talking to friends, and they were discussing and showing me information about a supposed paranormal entity that seemed to have reached our world and was kidnapping people en masse. The entity was very similar to those of Japanese folklore, called yurei, but a few major differences was that it had a completely void face, pitch black, and it was more amorphous than it was humanoid. It didn't have visible feet or hands, and its white, broken clothing flowed in the air, as it preferred floating, but it had been seen walking and even running. It also had significantly large claws, which it would use to drag people out of their beds and take them to who knows where. But I still recall watching a video showing the entity stalk and attempt to wake up one of its victims. I never got to see the end of the video, but the takeaway was that you had to keep your eyes shut and not look at it, because as soon as you did, it would be game over. After this sequence, I was taken abruptly to another dream where I was coddling a child, probably myself or a son of sorts. I was telling him that he needed to do was keep his eyes closed, no matter how scary the monster seemed, and that no matter what, he'd be safe from anything as long as he did. But after just a few seconds, I'm suddenly awoken from my dream. I hear very loud and fast footsteps heading to me. I closed my eyes, still remembering my dream vividly, and suddenly I'm barraged by an extremely loud, blood-curdling scream of a woman. The scream would change direction, as I assumed the entity was doing something similar to what I saw in the video, floating around as a way to overwhelm me. This continued for several minutes. The screams never lowered. But after those minutes passed, I fell asleep again and woke up normally. I was so relieved that everything was simply a dream. As I woke up fairly shaken up, I was more awake than I had been in several months. But I again was glad that nothing I had experienced was real, but my mood changed a little when I started feeling itchy. I looked at my abdomen and noticed huge claw marks on me. As soon as I noticed them, my nerves kicked in and I started to feel a world of pain. Thought it did stop after half an hour. But fortunately, none of this interfered in my sleep, and since then, I haven't had any issues with sleep paralysis or EHS. I can assume and reassure myself that it was simply a dream. But those claw marks tell me a different story. I have been living in rural Ohio for about the last year. Since moving in with my husband, I have become what some would call the crazy cat lady of our neighborhood. It's not that I have a lot of cats, it's that I feed and befriend every stray I come across. Living in the country means you are surrounded by wildlife. Deer, mice, skunks, rats, bats, raccoons, possums, and, you guessed it, cats. Humans are terrible creatures sometimes. They have a habit of taking in animals they can't handle, then quickly changing their minds when things get too hard. When that happens in the city, most people drop their new pets off at a local shelter. Here in the country, they just throw them outside. If those unloved furballs aren't fixed, they team up and make more of themselves. If I had to guess, our small town alone has about 50 strays. I would guess I have made friends with around 15 of them in the past year. I leave food on my front and back porch for them every night. I brush the more friendly ones, and I've even kidnapped a few for a day to take them in for vaccines. I can't adopt them all, but I want to try and make life a little less hard for all these guys. Lately, something strange has been happening, though. I have a tendency to stay up late. My husband started working the night shift about a year ago, and it's hard to get used to sleeping in an empty bed. Since we moved for his job, I have developed a case of separation insomnia. I only really sleep well on his days off. I work the average 7 to 3 shift. When I get home, I try to clean the house, tend to our pets indoor and outdoor, and make dinner, breakfast for him to eat before work. During this time, my husband Jake is fast asleep. He sleeps just fine without me. Lucky bastard. Sometimes I nap with him after I make dinner, and he wakes up around 9 p.m. to get ready for work. Once he's gone, I tend to just turn on the TV and game to pass the time until I have to get myself ready for work. Jake and I pass like ships in the night. It's hard to manage sometimes, but we are working toward buying the house we are currently renting. After this past week, though, I hope he can be convinced to relocate. About 6 days ago, I was in the living room watching a show about hoarding when I heard something big dragging across our porch. It was around 11 p.m., and Jake had literally only been at work for an hour at this point. Sounds on our porch weren't unusual. There was a cat buffet out there, but whatever had made this sounded bigger than a cat. Its weight was closer to that of a dog, or even a person. I paused the television and waited in the silence for it to happen again. My dog Bella slept soundly at my feet. Nothing happened. Our front door leads straight into our living room. There are 2 huge windows that never seem to be completely covered by the curtains, and our couch sits right below those windows. I try to arrange the curtains to the part of the window that isn't covered as farthest away from my face. If I'm laying on the couch, it's nearest to my feet, I peeked out one of the windows onto the porch and saw absolutely nothing there, so I simply pressed play and kept watching my shows. When the sun came up, nothing was unusual, except the cat food was completely untouched. The bowl on the back porch was empty like I expected. Nothing happened for a few days. Honestly, I had kind of forgotten about the sounds until 2 nights ago. This time the dragging happened around 2 a.m. I was actually upstairs in our bedroom, and I heard it this time. Our bedroom window is right above the porch, and I was shocked to realize I could hear this sound from all the way upstairs. It was far too heavy to be a cat. I muted the TV and listened, slightly nervous. My dog was in the bed next to me listening as well. The dragging continued. It was like someone was dragging their shoes across the wooden porch. Bella started to growl. It was a low, throaty sound I had never heard her make before. The fact that my dog was upset by this made me nervous. I couldn't call Jake until he went on break at 3 a.m. Not knowing what else to really do, I got up from the bed and walked quietly to the window. I opened it about a finger's width and listened for the dragging. Meow. The sound of a cat almost had me laughing with relief. Of course it wasn't a person. Bella had never once growled at a cat on our porch before, but maybe it was because we were all the way upstairs. I wondered if the sound was Toby. He was an orange tabby that was heavier than all the rest of the strays. He had a few other houses on the street feeding him. The dragging continued. Even Toby didn't seem to be that heavy. For almost 15 minutes, something dragged across my porch from one end to the other repetitively. Then it stopped completely. Bella stopped growling and went back to sleep, and I waited nervously to call Jake. He thought it was Toby. "You're tired," he told me. "You're up at night watching TV by yourself. Your imagination is running away from you." That didn't explain why Bella was upset, but maybe he was right. For all I knew, there was a stray cat I didn't know yet putzing around on our porch. The next morning, the cat food bowl was toppled over. None of the food inside was eaten. This all leads me to what happened last night. Just a few hours ago. Jake was off work Monday. We spent the night enjoying each other's company and watching movies on a couch. Neither of us heard anything strange. I went to work Tuesday morning on basically no sleep at all. I came home to do my usual routine and threw Jake's work uniform into the laundry. While I waited for it to dry, I made the mistake of falling asleep on the couch. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a cat meowing. Moonlight was streaming through the crack where the curtains didn't fully cover the window. By my feet, the television had turned itself off because it was on a set timer. Jake must have gotten ready and left for work without waking me up. Bella lay on the floor beside the couch, and again she was growling. Meow. Meow. Bella growled louder at the sound of it. Her hackles were raised and could tell she was working her way up to a bark, dragging again. The thing lumbered across the porch and over to the window. I could see the shape of it blocking out the light where the curtain didn't cover. In that moment I was sure of two things. The first was that there was not a cat on my porch at all. The second was that whatever was out there was looking into my living room. Meow. This was a damn near perfect cat impression. If I couldn't see the huge, horrifying human shadow at my window, I might have even believed it. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I couldn't move. Bella jumped to her feet, ran to the side of the window where the shadow loomed, and let out one good ferocious bark. Then she seemed to really see whoever was at the window. She began to tremble and whimper. Meow, the shadow said to her. I was too frightened to move. My dog was whining at my feet, and I couldn't tell if this weirdo on my porch was able to see me laying there or not. After a few moments of silence, A bark resounded through the room. At first I thought Bella had found her voice again, but she was still shaking at my feet. No sound had come from her mouth. The shadow at the window was mimicking her. I could feel tears start to stream down my face. All I could think about was a question. Had Jake locked the door before he left for work? I don't know how long I laid there crying in silence and fear, listening to this shadowy person meow and bark. When the sun came up around 5 a.m., the shadow shifted. It seemed to slowly drag itself away from the window and off my porch. It's now 6 a.m. as I write this. Bella and I are still shaking. Jake should be getting off work soon. When he gets here, I'm telling him I want to fucking move.